My blind date turned out to be my boss, but nobody was ready for what she said at dessert. The maître d', said table 6, and I walked past the bar, past the couple arguing quietly near the window, past the woman in the red blazer who was already looking at me. And then my feet stopped making decisions without my permission. Because the woman in the red blazer was my boss, not a floor supervisor, not a department head. My actual boss. The director of operations who had declined 3 of my project proposals in 4 months with 2-word comments that had kept me awake on separate Tuesday nights, each one a little verdict I had spent too long trying to appeal inside my own head. The woman whose calendar I had stood outside of on 4 separate occasions, waiting for a 5-minute slot that never materialized, while her assistant gave me the particular practiced smile of someone who has delivered bad scheduling news professionally and at scale. The woman who moved through our open plan office like the building had been architecturally designed around her preferences, and who had called a department meeting last November that began at 9 o'clock exactly because nothing in her professional life began any other way. She looked up from the menu. She said, "You have got to be kidding me." I said, "I really genuinely wish I were." For about 4 seconds, neither of us moved. The restaurant hummed around us, silverware, low music, the specific warm noise of a Friday night crowd that had absolutely no interest in what was happening at table 6. I was supposed to meet someone named Claire. My friend Jamie had given me a description, early 30s, red blazer, already there when you arrive. You'll like her. Just go. I had taken that description to mean that fate was being unusually cooperative tonight, which was out of character for fate in my experience. I now understood that Jamie was going to owe me a long and very detailed explanation that included the specific reason she had not mentioned that Claire was the name my boss used outside of professional contexts, and that the person at table 6 had signed my original offer letter 14 months ago. My boss set her menu down. She looked at the empty chair across from her. She looked at me. "So," she said, "do we stay? Or do we go?" I should have said go. Every professional instinct I had, every version of Monday morning, every mental image of riding the elevator to the 14th floor and making eye contact in a hallway, said go. But the maître d' was already pulling out my chair, and I had the specific paralysis of a person whose body makes a decision before their brain has finished the sentence. And I sat down. "Stay," I said. She picked up her menu. "Then we're not talking about work." Agreed, and we're not telling anyone in the building. Absolutely not. She turned a page. "They have burrata. I've been thinking about burrata since Tuesday, and I would rather not have that derailed by a scene." And that was how it began. Not with grace. Not with the easy warmth Jamie had promised, but with a woman who managed the professional futures of 63 people choosing a cheese course and deciding, with the same quiet authority she applied to quarterly projections, that we were staying. Her name was Victoria. I had known that technically for 14 months. It was on my offer letter, the org chart, the conference room door plaque, the company directory where her title took up 2 full lines. But she had only ever been the director in office conversation and a last name in emails, and I had called her nothing to her face because our conversations had been brief and corridor-shaped. And I had existed in her orbit the way a small planet orbits something larger, aware of the gravity, unsure of the distance. Now she was across a candlelit table and the sommelier was coming toward us, and I was supposed to do something with my face that looked like a person on a date. "I'm going to say," I said, "that this is the most surprised I have been in any context in recent memory." "This isn't a professional context," she said, with the precision of someone who has already decided that. "That's the point." She broke a piece of bread without looking at it. Jamie didn't tell you anything about who you were meeting. She said early 30s, red blazer. You'll like her. She told me you were the kind of person I'd actually like, Victoria said. Which I took as a challenge, because Jamie overpromises, and we both know it. She looked at me over the breadbasket. I almost canceled. What stopped you? Burrata, she said, and curiosity. In that order. The sommelier suggested something. We said yes, and the evening did what evenings sometimes do when they've already exceeded expectations in the first 4 minutes. It settled into itself. We talked about the restaurant, which she had been trying to reserve for 6 weeks because the chef had previously run a place she loved in another city and had brought a particular lamb preparation with him when he left. We talked about the neighborhood. She had lived 4 blocks away for 2 years, and I had walked those same 4 blocks at least twice a week for 14 months on different routes, and we had apparently never been in the same coffee shop, or passed each other at the corner, or stood at the same crosswalk. She found this statistically improbable. I found it the kind of detail you file away without knowing why. The burrata arrived, and we both pretended this was ordinary. We talked about the neighborhood's changing character and her opinion of the new building on the corner and whether the city was better in October or April, and a dozen other things that belonged to the evening and not the office. And all of it had the quality of a conversation where both people are paying more attention than they're letting on. And then her phone lit up on the table. She glanced at it. Something happened in her expression, not dramatically, not the kind of shift you would catch if you weren't watching closely, but the small controlled tightening I had seen cross her face in meetings when something required management without the appearance of managing it. She turned the phone face down. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Work," she said. "Ignore it. I thought we weren't talking about work." "We're not. That's why I turned it over." It lit up again. And a third time, while the waiter described the evening specials in the unhurried manner of someone who does not know there is a timeline. She turned it face down after each one, and we continued through the appetizer, which was exactly as good as she had anticipated. And the conversation stayed on the surface of things the way conversation does when both people are aware of something that hasn't been said yet and are deciding when. After the 4th notification, she didn't turn it over. She picked it up, read for a moment, and placed it back on the table right side up. The decision in that small reversal was visible. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I want to be clear that I'm saying this as a person at dinner, not as your employer, because those are genuinely different conversations, and this one needs to happen as the first kind." My wine glass was halfway to my mouth. I set it down. "Marcus filed a formal complaint against you on Wednesday," she said. "I found out this morning." The restaurant continued. Someone laughed at a table near the window. The music stayed low and entirely unhelpful. I sat with the name for a moment the way you sit with a sound you heard in the dark and aren't sure was real. Marcus, senior account strategist, 3 years at the company before I arrived. The particular brand of professional charm that works in every room it enters and leaves nothing you can point to afterward. We had never had a visible conflict. No raised voices, no documented disagreement, no email thread that would read badly if someone forwarded it without context. What we had, for approximately the last 8 or 9 months, was a pattern I had noticed in the way you notice something moving in your peripheral vision. A slow and barely perceptible repositioning, where ideas I'd floated in early project meetings would surface, slightly transformed, in his presentations 2 weeks later. Where assignments I'd been told were coming would get quietly rerouted, where by the time any given deliverable was finished, my contributions had become context and his had become conclusions, and the authorship felt genuinely murky to anyone who hadn't been watching from the beginning. I had been watching. I had not known what to do with what I saw, and more importantly, I had not known who, if anyone, to tell. "What kind of complaint?" I said. "He's claiming you misrepresented your contributions on the Alderton account, that you took credit for strategic framework that wasn't originally yours." She was watching me with the steady attention of someone who intends to remember the response accurately. "HR has a formal review scheduled. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. Monday morning. 60 hours from this table." "That is not what happened on Alderton," I said. "I know," she said. I looked at her. "I've read every version of the Alderton project file," she said. "Every draft, every iteration, every comment thread and revision note. I have been reading your project files for approximately 11 months, which I understand requires some explanation. So let me give you the context that makes it less strange and possibly more uncomfortable." She set down her fork. "The 3 proposals I sent back, I need you to understand those were returned for process reasons. The first one had documentation gaps in the data sourcing that wouldn't have cleared compliance review. The second exceeded the quarterly budget ceiling by 19% with no flag justification, which is a standard process requirement, not a judgment about the work. The third was genuinely excellent, and I declined it because Marcus had submitted an almost identical scope 2 days earlier, and I needed to understand that situation before I could move on yours." She paused. I did not explain that in my comments. I said, "Reconsider scope," when I should have said, "I need to resolve a conflict before this can proceed." That was my failure, not yours. And I've been meaning to address it for months. The third proposal. 5 weeks of work. Reconsider scope in the comment field. I had read those 2 words on a Tuesday evening and translated them into a verdict about my professional ceiling, and I had spent the following weeks adjusting downward accordingly, submitting smaller versions, writing to a limit I had constructed entirely from my own misreading. "He submitted an almost identical scope," I said. The sentence arrived in my mouth with the weight of something I had half known and refused to finish knowing. "I believe he had access to your working draft before you submitted," she said. "I cannot prove that yet. But I have been building toward that proof, and what I have now is very close to sufficient." "He was in my files," I said. "I believe so. The timeline alone is damning, independent of anything else." Outside the window, a cab stopped, and someone got out, and the city continued its Friday with no acknowledgement of what had just been placed on the table between us. Inside, the candle burned, and I sat with the shape of the last 11 months rearranging itself in my understanding. The ceiling that hadn't been a ceiling. The window Marcus had identified and decided to use. The space I had made for him without knowing I was making it. "Why are you telling me this tonight?" I said. "Like this, in a restaurant." The pause she gave was not the pause of someone searching for words. It was the pause of someone deciding how much of the true answer to give. "When Jamie called," she said, "and told me she'd arranged a date, and I heard your name, my first thought was that this was a complication I didn't need in the middle of a situation I was already managing. My second thought was that you had been navigating the last 11 months without knowing what you were actually navigating, and that the shape of it had been visible to me the whole time, and that you deserved to hear it from someone who could tell you accurately." She looked at her glass. "And I couldn't have this conversation in the building. The walls there have people in them." "The walls have people in them," I repeated. "Marcus has a relationship with someone in the executive suite," she said. "I don't yet know the full scope of it. What I know is that anything committed to writing moves considerably faster in that building than the official channels would suggest. and I needed this particular conversation to happen somewhere the paper trail doesn't reach. We sat for a moment in the particular silence of two people who have arrived at a dinner for one reason and discovered they are already in the middle of something else. "I want to see the complaint," I said. "I'll send it to your personal email tonight." "I have one." "I wasn't going to assume otherwise," she said, and the corner of her mouth moved, which I was noting as the version of a smile she produced when something landed without announcing itself. The entrees arrived, and we did something remarkable, which was to actually have dinner. Not a debrief, not a negotiation wrapped in table linens, but a conversation that belonged to the evening. She had grown up in a small city I'd never been to, and left at 18 with no stated intention of returning, and went back once for a funeral, and not again. She had spent 4 years in a different industry before the pivot into operations. "I thought finance would be interesting," she said. And then I understood it thoroughly. And it turned out understanding it was the precise end of my interest in it. And had almost quit twice in her first year at the company, for reasons she described as structural, and which I understood to mean the friction of someone built for a certain kind of precision, finding the environment not yet arranged for it. She read novels on Tuesday nights because she had decided at some point that Tuesday was a day that deserved defending. She had opinions about cities delivered with the specificity of someone who forms views from close observation rather than reputation, and the particular dry quality of her humor arrived without announcement and left you realizing what had happened 3 beats after it landed. I talked, which surprised me more than it should have. She asked questions the way a skilled surgeon operates, precise, no wasted motion, straight to the thing without appearing to move toward it. She asked what I had done before this job, and I told her, and she listened with the quality of attention that makes you want to be more precise than you planned to be. She asked what I found actually difficult, not professionally difficult, but genuinely, and the question was so direct I laughed before I answered it. "Knowing when to push," I said. She held that for a moment, and when not to. "I tend to err one direction," I said. "I know," she said, and it arrived without judgment or pity, just as an observed fact, which was somehow more disarming than either would have been. She asked what I had actually wanted the Alderton project to become, and I told her, and the version I described was 3 times as ambitious as the scope I'd submitted, and she listened through all of it without reacting and then said, quietly, "Why didn't you write that version?" "I didn't think it would be approved," I said. "By who?" "By you." She held that for a moment. "You've been writing to what you thought my ceiling was." "I've been writing to what your feedback suggested your ceiling was," I said. Declined proposals translate into limits in the absence of other information. Declined proposals for process violations translate into process violations, she said. That is different from limits. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite regret, but its close neighbor. "I've been reading what you're actually capable of for 11 months and watching you submit something smaller each time. And I couldn't understand why, and now I can." The comments were too compressed. I turned a process flag into a verdict by not explaining it, and you translated the verdict into a ceiling, and Marcus used the ceiling. She picked up her wine. "I need the full version of that Alderton scope. 2 weeks. All of it. The one you just described." It was not a dinner invitation to a follow-up. It was my employer. Briefly and cleanly operating as my employer across a candlelit table, directing me to produce the work I had been capable of the whole time. And then she picked up her fork and went back to having a view about the risotto, and the evening continued. We were somewhere in the quiet space after entrees, in the lull before a dessert menu arrives and either someone checks the time or someone says yes to the chocolate thing, when her phone lit up again. This time she looked at it and did not put it down. She turned the screen toward me. It was a text. The name saved in her contacts was a single letter, M. The message read, "I heard you took the night off. Interesting timing. I'll need you available Monday for the review. This one isn't going your way." I read it twice. The candlelight made the words look warmer than they were. "He texts you," I said. "He's been texting me for 4 months," she said. "He has been operating under the assumption that we have an understanding, that the pattern of how I've handled this situation looks, from his vantage point, like tacit support. The reassignments, the declined proposals, what reads, to someone watching from outside, like a gradual narrowing of your scope." She placed the phone face down. "He believes my neutrality is alliance. He is incorrect. What does he think the understanding is? Specifically, he thinks I've been quietly clearing a path for him. That the returned proposals and the reassignments are his signal that I'm on his side of this, and that Monday is a formality." She looked at the tablecloth for a moment. "He has mistaken my management of a complicated situation for alignment with his agenda. That mistake is going to cost him on Monday." I looked at the face of a woman who had been running a counter-operation in complete silence for months, while I had been navigating the situation from the outside, unable to read the map because I didn't know the map existed. The window Marcus had identified, the ceiling I had built from signals I'd misread, the texts he sent her assuming a partnership she had never agreed to. "The file access logs you mentioned," I said. "Walk me through what you have." 3 weeks ago I had it pull the version histories on every file in the Alderton project, she said. "Document management systems record who accesses what and when, which file, which user, which device, at what timestamp. Most people don't know those records are recoverable at all. Marcus opened your working draft at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, 8 days before he submitted his scope. She said it the way you say something you've had ready for a while. And there's a communications log, a private channel between Marcus and an executive contact named Garrett who oversees budget approvals. I obtained that through a separate channel, and the relevant message is direct. Marcus wrote, and I am quoting exactly, 'I need Garrett's signature before the other version gets traction. He doesn't know how to push it yet, and I can use that window.' He doesn't know how to push it yet. I could feel the entire architecture assembling. The window Marcus had measured and entered. The ceiling I had constructed from misread signals. The parallel version of 14 months, where I had been the person who didn't know how to push. And Marcus had used that with the patience and precision of someone who had done this before and intended to do it again. There is a specific feeling that arrives when you understand you have been inside a strategy without knowing it. Not paranoia, not anger exactly, but a clarifying coldness. The kind that comes with suddenly being able to see the edges of a room you've been standing in. Marcus had not simply taken an idea. He had read me, identified the specific quality of my hesitation, and architected a situation designed to fit the shape of it. He knew I would write smaller after the declined proposals. He knew I would not walk into Victoria's office and demand an explanation. He had used my professionalism as a tool against me. And it had worked, and he had been confident enough in how well it had worked that he was now texting my boss to tell her this one isn't going your way. He had confused patience for permission. He was about to find out those are different things. "He didn't steal my project," I said, and I heard it land as I said it. "He stole my name, yes," she said, "and I have the timestamps to prove it. He stole your name." The words were 4, and they were exactly right, and they cost nothing to say once I heard them. "Why 3 weeks ago?" I said. "Specifically, why did you pull the logs 3 weeks ago?" the deciding how true to be quiet again. The candle had burned considerably lower. The restaurant had thinned around us without our noticing, the way time moves differently inside a conversation that is actually going somewhere. 3 weeks ago, I found out Marcus had submitted a reference about you to the executive suite, she said. Something Garrett had solicited, which was already unusual. The language in it was designed to look neutral to someone reading quickly and to read to someone paying attention, as a professional burial. Clean sentences. Careful hedging, the kind of document that sits in a personnel file and shapes decisions without ever being directly challenged or attributed. She paused. I read it and thought, no, not on something I read in every draft, and no belonged to you. Not while I have the access records and I haven't used them yet. She looked at me directly. He didn't steal your project. He stole your name. And I was not going to let a burial document be the last word on it. Something was shifting in the room, or possibly inside me specifically, and I was having some difficulty working out which. You were protecting my job, I said. I said I'd tell you about the complaint, she said quietly. I didn't say that's what I was protecting. The waiter appeared at a respectful distance. We both said yes to the chocolate thing without consulting the menu. When he left, I looked at her across what remained of the evening and said, "Then what were you protecting?" She held my eyes. "I wasn't protecting your job," she said. "I was protecting my answer." "Your answer to what?" "To whatever this is," she said, and she gestured once, not at the table, not at the restaurant, but at the two of us, at the fact of us across this specific candlelit table on this specific Friday that had gone somewhere neither of us had planned for it to go. I didn't say anything immediately. I sat with it the way you sit with something that has just reorganized everything it touched. You should have canceled when Jamie told you who she was setting you up with, I said. Yes, she said. You should have texted me a professional email Monday about the HR situation and kept the rest of it in the building where it belongs. Objectively, she said. Why didn't you? She looked at me for a long moment. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary Friday in the way cities do, enormous and indifferent and beautiful. Inside, the waiter set down the chocolate thing and retreated without a word. Because I have been watching you underestimate yourself for 11 months, she said, and I was tired of it. The chocolate arrived, and it was very good, and we ate it across from each other in the particular silence of two people who have said the true things and are now simply in the room together, which is sometimes its own kind of language. At 9:47 her phone rang. She answered immediately, "Send me everything." 3 words. "Done," she put it down. "My HR contact," she said. "The file access documentation came through. Everything I need for Monday is in that package." "What does Monday look like?" I said. Marcus presents his complaint. HR reads it into the formal record, and then I present a 17-page response with supporting documentation, the version histories, the access timestamps, the Garrett communications log, which I believe HR is going to find considerably more interesting than the original complaint. She folded her napkin with the efficient precision she brought to everything. He is very good at what he does. He's been doing it a long time, and he knows exactly how to build something that holds. But he made one mistake. What mistake? He assumed, she said, that I wasn't paying attention. I thought about this woman across from me, who had read project files at night for 11 months, who had pulled at records 3 weeks before she needed them, who had sat in the same building as me for over a year and let me believe the ceiling was lower than it was because the floor wasn't safe yet, because she was building the thing that would make the floor safe before she moved. He didn't know you were watching, I said. No one knows I'm watching, she said. That's rather the point. We paid the check. We walked out into the night air, which was cool, and carried the city's particular Friday smell. Restaurants and concrete, and something green from the park 2 streets over. We stood on the sidewalk outside the entrance in the specific pause that exists at the end of an evening that has become considerably more than it was supposed to be, and that nobody is quite ready to close. Monday, I said. 9 o'clock, she said. Walk in, sit down, and let me do the work I've already done. That's the entirety of what I need from you. And tonight, I said. She looked at me. The streetlight caught her the way the candlelight had. Clear, contained, the same person in both lights, certain in a way that had nothing to do with performance. Tonight was not work, she said. No, I said. It wasn't. She looked at the sidewalk for a moment. Then back at me. A cab passed and the headlights moved across the buildings and were gone. You asked me earlier why I almost canceled, she said. Curiosity and Barata, I said, in that order. That was the easy answer, she said. The honest one is that I've been reading your work for 11 months and wanting to have this conversation. And when Jamie gave me the reason, I took it. She said it without drama, the way she said most things, as information, as fact, offered clearly and then left where it landed. She said the last thing she said on that sidewalk in a voice I had no prior file for. I won't kiss you tonight, she said. Ask me Monday. And then she walked, without hurrying, the 4 blocks to her apartment. And I stood on that sidewalk holding a Monday I had been dreading for 60 hours as though it had become something else entirely. Which it had. Monday arrived the way every important day does, too early and without mercy. I was in the HR conference room at 8:45. The table was long and institutional, and lit by the specific overhead light designed to make everything feel like a document. I sat on one side and waited. Marcus arrived at 8:59. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a person who has arranged his pieces carefully and has no reason yet to believe any of them have been touched. He set his folder on the table, nodded at me the way you nod at someone you are about to professionally disassemble, and sat across from me with the expression of a man who has given this presentation before. Victoria walked in at 9 o'clock exactly. Laptop, printed documents set. She placed both on the table without looking at either of us, which is a thing you can do when you already know exactly where everything is. She sat at the head of the table. Diane from HR sat to her left with a notepad and the careful professional neutrality of someone whose job is accurate observation. Marcus opened. He was, as I had known him to be, genuinely skilled at this. Measured language, an air of reluctant obligation, dates and deliverables arranged into a narrative so balanced it sounded, to anyone without context, like a straightforward account of a simple problem. He named the Alderton account with the confidence of someone who has made peace with the story he's telling. He described a pattern of credit misappropriation with the tone of someone who had hoped things could be resolved quietly and had run out of alternatives. He spoke for 11 minutes without pausing and without looking anywhere except at Diane. Victoria let the room hold the silence after he finished. Then she opened her laptop, turned it to face Diane, and said, "I'd like to enter a formal response into the record." What followed was 43 minutes and 17 pages, and the kind of documentation that doesn't leave room for interpretation. The version histories. The file access timestamps. Marcus's name and device identifier, and the date and time. 11:47 on a Tuesday, 8 days before his scope submission. And then the Garrett Communications log, and when Victoria read that specific message aloud, the one about the window, about someone not knowing how to push yet, the quality of the silence in the room changed in a way that required no announcement. Diane's pen stopped moving. She looked at the document. She looked at Victoria. She wrote something down that took considerably longer than her previous notes. Victoria addressed Diane throughout. She addressed the documentation. She addressed the formal record she was building with the same efficient precision she brought to everything she did. And when she was finished, she closed the laptop and said, "I would like to formally recommend that HR open a separate inquiry into the communications referenced in Exhibit 7 between the individual named therein and the executive contact on the 14th floor. I believe this situation is considerably broader than the original complaint would suggest." What the Garrett thread meant, beyond the specific messages in it, was that this had never been an isolated play. Marcus had not simply taken an idea and submitted it faster. He had cultivated a contact at the budget approval level, used that relationship to accelerate his submissions and stall mine, and used the resulting pattern of outcomes to make the narrowing of my scope look like a natural consequence of my own limitations. It was thorough. It had been built over time. And the thing about something built over time is that it leaves time's records if someone has thought to look for them. Marcus had built his system on the assumption that no one was looking. He had not accounted for a woman who looked at everything and said nothing about what she saw until she was ready to move. I watched that understanding arrive in his face during the second reading of the Garrett message. Not dramatically, just a shift. The specific stillness of someone who has understood that the room was never arranged the way they believed, and that the process of believing it had been part of the trap. Diane said she would need to confer with her supervisor before responding. Marcus said, "I think this evidence is being taken substantially out of context," Victoria said. Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the HR Handbook outlines the timeline for written responses. I'd encourage you to review it before the end of business today. He went quiet. The meeting ended. In the hallway outside, Victoria walked toward her office. I walked toward mine. The hallway was ordinary in every detail: fluorescent lights, motivational signage on the bulletin board, the neutral carpet, and the sound of someone's phone ringing 2 cubicles over. Nothing about those 40 feet of corridor would have told anyone anything. I was 3 steps past the bulletin board when I heard her say my name. My first name, not the professional last name designation she'd used for 14 months. My actual name, in her actual voice, which I now had a file for. I turned around. She was standing at the entrance to her office, with one hand on the doorframe, looking at me with the exact same expression she'd had on the sidewalk. "Ask me," she said. The hallway was empty in both directions. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere on the floor a phone rang once and stopped. "That was Monday," I said. "Yes," she said. "It was." She went into her office. The door closed. I stood in the hallway for a moment, with a sentence that had rearranged everything it touched. And then I went to my desk and opened a new document. At the top of it, I typed the beginning of the full version, the real one, the 3 times as ambitious version, the one I had described across a candlelit table to a woman who had asked, "Why didn't you write that version?" and I had not had an answer for at the time. I had an answer now. I was going to write the version I had always been capable of, and when it was finished I was going to walk to the 14th floor and knock on a door that had been open. I was beginning to understand, considerably longer than I'd known. Have you ever sat across from someone and realized, too late, and then not too late at all, that the person who had been quietly watching you, not to judge you, not to evaluate you, but simply because they could not make themselves look away, was the one who already knew what you were capable of before you did? And have you ever looked back at all the ceilings you built for yourself out of signals you misread, and thought about the person who never accepted a single one of them, and wondered what might have been different if you had let yourself be seen that much sooner? Leave that in the comments. And if you know someone who's been living inside a ceiling that was never real, share this with them before you go.